Chapter 13. Soldier. Ron looked around the room they were now standing in. He had honestly never seen anything like this before. The room was covered in floor-to-ceiling mats with a section a good 20 feet above their heads which was suspended mats and balance beams. He was currently sat next to Hermione on a small set of heavy wooden bleachers. Hermione was staring up at the painted symbol on the wall behind them. She couldn't say exactly what it was as she had never seen it before, but she had a good idea as it was the same one tooled into Genesis' belt and the bold soldier written under it gave her a good idea. Beside it was a red-painted Shinra Electric Power Company logo, though it was a lot smaller than the soldier symbol. Turning her eyes away from it, she looked down, seeing the changing Harry and the others out on the mat in front of the bleachers stretching. She couldn't help but flush slightly as they were all shirtless, except the two girls, and all of them were built. Draco was currently sprawled out one of the lower bleachers, actually asleep. Genesis had walked off into what they heard was the locker room to change into something other than the heavy leather he was currently wearing. This should be fun. Not. Angel, why don't you run this thing? Fred was currently stretching his arms high above his head. You know Genesis is going to take some sick pleasure in running our happy asses into the ground, or chasing us around the gym hucking fireballs at us. That is what Gaia invented barrier materia for Zachary. Harry said, sliding a small smile at Fred. I don't know about you, Seth, but I don't exactly have my materia anymore. Harry actually smirked and moved over to a bag that Genesis had dropped and started to root around in it and pulled out a large mesh sack of what looked to be glowing red, purple, green and yellow large marbles. Fred's eyes went instantly wide and he rushed over. Hermione was now curious. She had never seen anything like it, but she could feel the Pew magic pouring off them even from up here. Oh, give me a blizzard, will ya, Seth? Laughing, Harry held the bag up away from Fred. You will have to ask Genesis, puppy. These are his materia. Fred paled considerably at that and backed away, holding up his hands, shaking his head. He would rather skin me alive than let me touch any of his precious materia. Well, then I hope that you are good at dodging fireballs. Harry started to root through the sack of materia, allowing his fingers to feel out which was which. His acid green eyes watched as the Turks moved off to the other end of the gym to begin their own workout. Even though they were all enhanced, the Turks underwent a vastly different training than Soldier did. Where Soldier was about strength and materia, Turks were about stealth. Is Genesis swimming laps? Neville sighed and walked over to the locker room, trying to figure out where his overly dramatic friend was. Knowing Genesis, he's probably primping in front of the mirror as normal. Harry pulled a metal bracer from the bag and slipped it on over his wrist. Hermione watched in fascination as he held a green marble up to it and the marble sank into the bracer where it sat glowing softly. He repeated this with 3 more, 1 more green and 2 blue in an alternating pattern. What did you grab, Seth? Fred moved over looking curious. And how the hell do you get to steal Genesis materia? Harry smirked, putting the bag back into Genesis' bag and moved back out onto the mat, his bare feet silent across the blue fabric. Probably because I fuck his brains out all the time. Fred pulled a face and shoved Harry away, listening to him laugh. TMI, Seth. T.M.I. Ron pulled a face away. Yes, he was a homophobe, and hearing the fact that Harry had gone from having goo-goo eyes for Cho to suddenly saying he was fucking a man as far as they were concerned he met just last week. Granted, he was a bit on the feminine side when it came to looks, but it was obvious as he watched the man walking out shirtless and just in a pair of crimson and white basketball shorts that he was male. Did you get into my material again, Seth? Genesis shook his head, moving over to the bag and pulled out a can of mild energy drink. Instantly Harry was on top of him, fingers reaching for the can held above his head. Since it had only been a week since Sephiroth fully awoke, he hadn't returned to his normal 6 feet 1 inch height, so Genesis was still taller than him at the moment. "Jen, give me." Harry was hopping up trying to grab the energy drink. "You will get it afterwards." Shuffling away, Genesis put it back into his bag. Leaning over the bleacher, he wrapped his hand around the hilt of his beloved rapier. Not giving any warning, Genesis whirled around the blade, cutting through the air where Sephiroth had been only seconds ago. Harry landed several feet back, a green light flaring in his left hand, and that massive 7-foot sword appeared in his hand, the metal singing as the air moved over it. "Harry." Hermione was standing and had her wand drawn, Ron standing up as well, his own wand drawn. "Park it, Ron," Fred said, giving him a stern look. Surprisingly, Genesis isn't going to kill him. The two watched as Genesis practically flew at Harry but was knocked back by a swift block by a sword that Harry should have not been able to wield. "Well, let's hope that jealousy is gone. We don't need a repeat of the VR room," Neville said, watching the two now leaping across the mat's blades, creating sparks as the metal slid across each other. Sighing, Fred looked up to his brother, seeing the wide eyes as he watched the two streaking across the mat's swords, singing as they clashed together, their movements so fast it was almost impossible for him to keep up with them. Sephiroth has trained all his life to fight with a sword, been wielding Masamune since he was 10 years old. "Tell me, Ron." Fred moved up so that he was standing in front of his brother. They were about the same height now that Zack was starting to regain his full height. "What spell is out there that would give a person this complete knowledge of a sword in a matter of days?" "There isn't," Hermione said softly, her brown eyes softening as they watched the two sparring across the mat. Even though the blows appeared to be aimed to kill, the two men were smiling, seeming to have fun. If she were to be perfectly honest with herself, she had not seen Harry this happy the entire time she knew him. He always had a thing for danger, and it seemed he was his happiest right now, crossing swords with the redhead across from him. Ron, though, she watched with a sinking feeling in her stomach as Ron's eyes retained that green hue to them. His jealousy of his brother and Harry wasn't going away, even with this much proof in front of them. Sighing, Fred turned away. "Just get out, Ron." Growling, Ron stormed from the room. Hermione slowly moved down the bleachers. Even though she wanted to stay, there was something she needed to do. Moving into the library, Hermione walked up to Madame Pince, a wary look crossing her face. "Hello, Mrs. Granger." As much as she loved the library, she really hated dealing with Pince, even her. The model student that always returned library books in perfect condition well before the due date was still treated badly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I need help to see if there are any books containing these references." She set down a list of names and places she had so far heard Harry and the others using. There wasn't a lot, but she was hoping that there was something somewhere. Taking the list, Madame Pince gave her almost a dirty look, but she quickly waved her wand, her beady eyes going wide slightly as they got to hit for one of the words. "Here." She handed Hermione her list back, which now had a book number on it. "Thank you." Turning away, she headed back towards the section of the library she had actually never been in before. These books back here were some of the oldest in school, and though they were interesting, they were so old and so outdated that even she didn't hold much interest in them. Moving up to the aisle, she brought her sleeve over her nose. The dust in here was overly thick, coating all the books in a thick layer of the gray substance. Reaching up, she rubbed her hand over the books, looking at the numbers. 103.103. Here. Reaching up, she pulled out a small leather-bound book. Ancient Dark Wizards of Fairy Tales. Oh, you had to be kidding. This was an ancient kids fiction book, at least that was what it was used for. Moving to sit on the floor, she brushed the extensive amount of dust off the cover and cracked the ancient leather cover open, making sure to be careful. Flipping through the pages, she could help but giggle at some of these. She really had to wonder where wizards got their names from. She was about 3/4 of the way through the book when a title caught her eye. Calamity's Son. The Nightmare. Sephiroth. Blinking, Hermione instantly gave the page her full attention. She read down the page, her eyes going wider and wider. A legendary soldier of incredible strength, he was viewed as a living god for his skill in battle and magical powers. A child created by ancient Mul science to be the best soldier on the planet, was driven insane by the truth of his creation. He began to hate Shinra, the company that funded his creation, hated the people around him, and eventually began to hate the world. He viewed himself as a living god and was set on destroying the planet with a black materia called Meteor ... and nearly succeeded. Feeling her heart dropping down into her feet, Hermione flipped the page and felt her heart stop dead. Staring at her in a wall of flames was a man in a long black leather coat with silver shoulder guards. In his left hand he held the same sword she had seen Harry wielding with such ease only 10 minutes ago, with hair down to his knees, the color of silver, and eyes that glowed with pure insanity. The same acid green cat-slit eyes that stared back at her every time Harry looked at her. Materia. Sephiroth. Soldier. Shinra. It was true, they were telling the truth. And Harry nearly destroyed the world.
Well, I do hope you enjoyed the videos so far and video game content. And don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment down below. And I noticed 40% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. If you can, please subscribe to the channel. It'll help me and help the channel grow. Until next time, goodbye!